Welcome to episode 72 of the Well Bible Reading Podcast. This week we're in 1 Samuel, where you'll be reading chapters 3 through 5, Psalm 72, and John chapter 5. We have a lot to dig into this week, as usual. John is a little bit more packed and dense than I think even John 4 was, so I want to spend at least, hopefully, half of our time in John. So let's jump into 1 Samuel and try to get through these chapters so we can get through everything we need to talk about.
Yeah, let's do it. And when you texted me you have a lot to say in John, I said, good luck.
Yeah, you did.
I said, good luck.
It's becoming a theme. I have a lot to say in John. And they're like, okay, you take it. Because
good luck.
I think you're spending a lot of time in Samuel, which is good because I have less in Samuel than maybe you have. So it evens out.
It does even out. So I'm going to try to do our best to maybe kind of get through Samuel a little faster than normal to give you a little extra time today. That's
awesome.
The plan.
Love it.
We'll see what we can do. So we are in 1 Samuel 3. And so here we have the Lord is calling Samuel.
Yeah, so we have, and it's really, God is setting up Samuel as a prophet. This is, he's been living, and he is living the life of a priest, but this is where he's installed as God's prophet.
Yeah.
And we get language of God talks to Samuel face to face, much like the language that was used with Moses. So this is really the line of Moses that's being continued through Samuel.
Yeah, which is really interesting. I actually wrote down a note that says, is Samuel the next Moses, ? And then you started by talking about that. And I was like, I guess we had the same thought.
I think we did. And I think we're supposed to get that kind of sense that what was started in Moses, because you don't see that language with Joshua or any of the judges. Of course, God talks to them in ways. But here we have in verse 1, starting out, now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days, and there was no frequent vision. We already get this sense that the word of the Lord and visions from the Lord are rare and infrequent.
Yeah, not happening very often. And I propose a why. Well, I think a why is kind of obvious maybe, but we'll say it anyways. We just kind of reading Judges. It's the disobedience of the people.
Yep.
So God is like, I'm not going to be in your presence. I'm not going to be speaking often if you're not going to be obeying me. So this is what you see. You see a time and a period. Remember, Samson just died a few years before Samuel was born.
Right.
And so we're in that same time period of the Judges here.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Samuel's been called the last judge as well as their first prophet. And so this really is a transition time. And the people are losing or have lost the presence of Yahweh. But we're going to see the presence restored through one faithful Israelite here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think the idea of the word is rare and visions are infrequent, since it's two different things, are these two very different things, or are they the same thing, Craig?
That's a great question. I think you can cut it multiple ways. I think there is a sense where it's the same and different. I think there's a sense of the word of the Lord. Here it's becoming very manifest, right? It says there was no frequent visions, and the word of the Lord was rare. And the word of the Lord, the voice of God, the word of God, and visions are being stitched together here very closely. And even in verse 21 of the same chapter, and the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord.
Right.
So God is revealing himself tactically, very visually. It's a very physical presence that the word of the Lord is manifesting himself. And all through, we've seen all throughout the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, that there's this idea of this physical embodiment of Yahweh in various forms and various languages used. We see
pillars of fire and clouds. And
or the human visitors that came to visit that came to visit Abraham in Genesis at the Oaks of Mamre. We had one. We know one was Yahweh. The man that ended up being Yahweh that wrestled with Jacob.
Yeah.
The angel of the Lord that we've talked about throughout Joshua and Judges. The commander of the Lord's army, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a continuation of that kind of language where this Yahweh is always invisible everywhere, right? That's the invisible Yahweh. There's this physical manifestation of Yahweh that keeps coming up too. Now, of course, in Jewish thought, eventually that's going to prepare the way for the way we the early church, thought of Jesus. And that's definitely how John writes of Jesus in John 1.
Right.
So we see that tie all throughout, but just calling out the tie here is important.
Yeah, it is pretty neat that we just read John 1. We talk about Jesus being the Word, and the Word was since the beginning. And here is describing God's presence as the Word. And so that's really, really neat.
Exactly.
Yeah, such a good connection. As we enter into verse 2, man, we're flying through this right here. Verse 2 already.
Yeah, we're tearing it up.
Tearing it up. It says, and at that time, Eli's, whose eyes began to grow dim. Remember we talked about last week that Eli is being viewed as a priest who has been lazy. He's sitting and not working. He's overweight. He's heavy. He is eating more than he should from the Lord's portion. We talked about how he was spiritually kind of blind, and here you have his physical blindness catching up to him, and matching his.
Last week you even talked about how he sat on the seat of the throne of God.
Yes, right? Yeah.
So he's even claiming the entire house of God as his own.
Yeah, this is my house.
Yeah, this is my house. I'm not going to do anything to minister to God because I'm too busy ministering to myself.
And then here we see his eyes are going dim, but yet the lamp of the Lord has not gone dim, which is saying it has not gone dim yet, which are side by side. I think this is intentional. You have something else to say about the lamps, but the part that I thought was interesting about the lamps is oftentimes the lamps are referred to, the eyes are referred to as the lamps of the person, of the soul of the person. Here you see Eli's eyes, his lamps, going dim, but yet God's lamps are still burning bright, and I think that's really neat right there. This little image here.
Yeah, I think that is going on, and there's also this sense of where the lamp of God, which is the menorah. I think you said that it's menorah in the tabernacle. And it says it hadn't gone out yet, and there's this kind of double play, right? There's the sense of Exodus 27, 20 through 21 that tells us that the lamp of the temple was to be kept burning every night from evening till morning. And so this is telling us that the light has not gone out, and so the voice is coming to Samuel sometime at night, right? So the light is still burning at nighttime. But there's also the other sense that is set up in Leviticus 2, verses 1 through 4, that says the light should stay on and never go out. Yeah. So it should never be doused in the morning. The Levitical priesthood should tend to it, keep the oil available so the lamp can keep perpetually going and never burn out. And we're getting to a point where the Philistines are going to come in, take the ark, destroy the tabernacle at Shiloh, and the lamp will go out. So there's a little bit of a wordplay going on, and a little
Multiple
bit of a foreshadowing.
Yeah,
that the lamp of the Lord is going to go out because of Israel's disobedience and disloyalty.
That's amazing. I sometimes sit in awe in our conversations and remind myself, this is what happens when you are consistently meditating on God's word and you're grounded in the scriptures and you're doing it in community. Yeah, you're able to, these are word plays on top of word plays on top of foreshadow on top of, there's so much depth.
So many layers.
So many layers, and this is not to be done alone, I'm gonna be able to pick all these things up if I haven't come to God's word in a while.
Exactly.
And so I'm in awe oftentimes of our conversations, then I'm reminded I shouldn't be in awe. This is what this is about.
Yeah. Just as many, maybe probably more times, there's things you say and you pick up that I would have totally missed, and I'm in awe as well.
And back and forth for sure. I love it. And so we move forward. We see that it says, this is interesting, in verse 7 it says, now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord not yet been revealed to him. That was an interesting phrase. What do you have to take on that?
Yeah, I think this is, Samuel is installed in the priesthood. He's so much into the priestly life that he's sleeping by the ark, right? And Eli isn't.
Yeah.
And that probably tells us something about the position that each one felt like they were occupying as well, or the life they were living. But this is setting up that the word of the Lord had not been revealed, another physical kind of manifestation, wordplay on the word of the Lord. But this is preparing us for Samuel's calling as a prophet that is about to happen. The Lord, when it's talking about the Samuel did not know the Lord, this is again that Hebrew term yadah, knowing, like an experiential knowing. Yeah. He knew, obviously, he knew in his head, the head knowledge, cognitive knowledge, who God was. He knew his name. He knew the physical characteristics, the physical words, the history of Yahweh, right? Yeah. Learning the law. But the fact that he didn't know who God was through physical and personal interaction is what we're trying to get.
So I just thought of an example. See if this is kind of what you're thinking. It's sort of like I'm a huge MJ fan. To the point that my daughter's name is Jordan, partly for that reason. Like I love me some MJ, right? Yeah. I knew all of his stuff. Like I knew where he went to I knew his background. I knew all of his stats and statistics. I watched game film on his. I even tried not perfectly, the jump shot. Right, his jump shot. I had a decent jump shot in high school because I'd watched film. Anyways, I knew all those things, but I didn't actually know him. What's the word you just used? The word that's used here?
Yada.
I never yada'd Michael Jordan. I never experienced him. I actually never even got to see him play a game live on the court because it was before my time. Yeah. And so it's kind of that. Like I could really think I know him really well. I even have pictures of him hanging up in my room. Yeah. Yeah, we do that with God though.
Yeah, of course.
Like I go to church. I know his history. Yep. I know what his words say. I know all of his stats and statistics.
We could even say we know the theology.
Right. I may have some crosses hanging up in my wall. Right.
And it's one thing to know about God, to know about Jesus. Yes. But it's another thing to know them personally.
Right. And this is that moment right here.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
Great question.
That's the revealed.
Yeah.
Which is the same word. That's a similar word used for revelation. It's like an unveiling and an uncovering.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that's the same kind of vision language used in the, to use the fancy $5 word from last week, apocalyptic literature.
Yeah.
That is revelation. Yeah. The revelation of John, the vision of John. Yeah. Ezekiel 1 and Daniel are set up as visions when we get to those books.
Yeah, right? And we're talking about the visions. Yep. These visions are, so it's kind of similar language, which is really neat.
Yeah. So it all kind of ties in together.
So let's talk about verse 10. I guess we should go to verse 9 first. So we have Samuel is hearing this voice. Yeah. He runs to Eli, right?
Yeah, and he thinks Eli's calling him, obviously.
And Eli's like, it wasn't me. Go back to bed, right? And I think we give Eli credit a lot of times, like, oh, he knew it was the Lord. I don't know if he knew, because it seems to me maybe Eli has never heard. It says it's rare. Yeah. Samuel's hearing it for the first time. I'm suspecting that Eli's never heard it either. That's why it took him 3 times to go, oh, maybe the boy's hearing the voice of the Lord here.
I think you're obviously right that Eli has never heard the voice of God. I mean, we had the man of God in chapter 2 come and tell him the prophecy about Eli and his sons were going to be cut off for unfaithfulness. So, I agree. Eli didn't recognize and know what to look for in God's voice. I'll give him some credit, though. He knew enough. He knew about God enough to say the third time, hey, you should probably respond in this way because this is Yahweh.
I mean, we can give him a little bit of credit. I mean, even a ding-dong's going to give you it's going to say something right now and then.
A ding-dong. Maybe we should say even a broken clock is right twice a day.
There we go. Maybe that's a more proper way of saying it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Maybe for our Bible podcast.
Okay. Not bad. Not very good at this. Not politically correct. Just the other day you were like, I was trying to say that word. I was like, oh, my bad.
And we got it in anyway.
I did.
That's awesome.
Anyway, so we have this moment where he gives him really good advice. Yeah. And then he does. Samuel goes back and lays down for the third time. And verse 10 is one that stood out to me a lot. And the Lord came and stood calling as the other times. And he says, Samuel, Samuel. This is interesting. You go first. We both have something here.
God says Samuel's name twice, right, in verse 10. And that's the first time since Moses that God has said anybody's name twice. And God also called Abraham's in Genesis 22:11 and Jacob's name twice in Genesis 46:2. Wow. So we get this another tie back to Moses and even to the patriarchs that Samuel's in that line of God calling these faithful men that he's going to work through.
That's pretty insane to be if those are the men he has said his name twice, I mean, that really elevates what God's going to do in Samuel if he's faithful.
Exactly.
If he continues.
If he's faithful.
He still has the choice to be used by God.
It's always a choice, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we come down to God invites. Yeah. And we talked about this before too. God's predestination is only going to come in when the human who is called is responding in obedience. So you're predestined to be sons of God if you believe in Christ, right? And the Greeks, that's how the Greeks thought about predestination when the oracles of Delphi, for example, gave a prophecy. If you do this, then this will come to pass. So it's always a choice. God is never going to override human free will, but his plan and his will is still going to become, is going to come to fruition some way or the other.
Yeah, I agree. And what's interesting is you almost get to feel like he almost, because he is sovereign, knows Samuel is going to respond the way he responds because he goes ahead and does say his name twice. Yeah. So he's already elevating Samuel because he knows where Samuel's going to go, and it's really neat to watch.
Agreed.
That's a pretty big company to be named with. Yeah, for sure.
So if you hear God calling your name twice, you should probably watch out because some big things are coming.
I'd make me nervous.
Yeah.
The part that stood out to me was, yes, the name twice, but also the when it says the Lord stood. So before we talked about the word of God kind of representing his presence or like his voice, right? This seems like more of a physical or closeness, even closer than before, maybe even physical. And I was even reminded of Exodus 17, verse 6, where it's Moses and they're in the wilderness and they're all complaining because they're thirsty. And God's like, I'm going to go stand over there and you're going to strike the rock and out forth comes water. And he says, I'm going to go stand on that rock. It's the same word here as he's stood. It's a physical embodiment. Yeah.
Makes sense. It just continues this theme of the physical manifestation of God.
Yeah.
And, of course, as Christians, we're going to let's say these are Jesus, right? And we talked about, even the New Testament talks about how Jesus was the rock that was struck and provided for the Israelites in the wilderness. So the fact that we would see the Word of God here as Jesus as well shouldn't shock anybody, but it continues to just blow my mind how we see these threads of Jesus throughout the Old Testament. Even if we're reading back into it with New Testament eyes in some sense, the New Testament isn't doing anything new that wasn't already in the Old Testament.
Absolutely, 100%. Before we go into chapter 4, I do want to end, you already mentioned it, but the very last verse in chapter 3 mentioned that the Lord has revealed himself to Samuel. And so at Shiloh, by the word of the Lord. Yeah. So we see that now it's it's becoming common again, right? He is revealing himself. There are prophetic words. We're going to actually see them. The people of Israel go, oh, he's prophetic, and everything that he has said has come to pass, right?
Yeah.
They say that.
It says all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, which we said as you've said before, that means all of Israel, top to bottom.
Top to bottom.
Knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. That's verse 20.
Yeah. And what I think was interesting about that, what that stood out to me as I was thinking about it was, wow, so God's presence, because of their disobedience, was not dwelling with them, was rare. His voice was not being heard. His presence was not near. He was not giving visions. And yet it did not take an army to get it back. What did it take?
It took a faithful Israelite, a faithful human.
One person willing to be used by God.
Right.
So if you are someone who is willing to be used by God, you can change all of history.
Yeah.
Like
God will use you.
He will use you. Yeah. Think about the nation as a whole, Israel and the nations around them. God's presence was gone. Yeah. Right? The corruption was huge. I think there's a shift of corruption happening here. Like most people, it's supposed to shift happening because of one person's willingness to be used by God, and that could be you too. Yeah. So do not underestimate his calling you as a single person.
Totally agree. Great lesson. Great lesson.
Chapter 4. Start us off.
So as much as Samuel was at the forefront in chapter 3, right?
Yes.
Now we see a different kind of character starting to take center stage.
That's right. In chapter 3, you see Samuel is elevated as the main character, and the ark is mentioned once in verse 3. Here, for the next several chapters 4 through 7, Samuel takes a back seat, and the Ark of the Covenant takes full ground. They're the main character. And I wrote down that it's kind of interesting that as though we are, obviously, chapter 3 is elevating Samuel to the new prophet, right? The new Moses, all the things. They're elevating Samuel, but even still, the next several chapters are going to remind you, nope, the Ark of the Covenant and Yahweh is still king.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I told you before we started that all week I've wanted to watch Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Indiana Jones movie. Got the whip and the fedora hat.
right.
So for those of you who don't know Indiana Jones, it's a great movie, but it just led me to think how we continue to misunderstand the ark because, and Hollywood perpetuates this because in that movie, the ark it's got like they find it, they open it, and this weird power comes out, like these beams of light that basically sucks the life out of everybody around. Unless if you're looking at it, if you hide your eyes, you're okay. Which maybe is supposed to be the glory of the God. I don't know, to give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt, but there's like this magic that the ark has, and that's the way the Israelites treat the ark in chapters 4, and the Philistines kind of see it that way in chapter 5. We'll see, but we misunderstand it. They misunderstood it in their day.
Yeah.
So what's going on here? Why do you think we want to treat these things as magical talisman? Why did the Israelites think it was this magic talisman? Because they lose to the Philistines at Aphek, and then they just kind of trot out the ark to try to save themselves in the next battle.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like they're idolizing the box and not necessarily worshiping the person who's supposed to dwell in it. Right? It's Yahweh they need to be worshiping, but yet they idolize this box. And I wrote down the same thing. I said it's like they're a magical box. They need to rub the box, and good things are gonna come happen.
Magical genie.
That's what I feel like they kind of treat it as. And it's like they trust the object more than they trust Yahweh.
Yeah.
Here, which is really fascinating. But they do. They're like, all right, well, we're being defeated. So, mind you, there was a lot. The Ark of the Covenant should not leave the tabernacle. So here's yet again the priest. Eli lets them.
Yeah.
Eli lets them.
Yeah.
And his 2 sons take it, which, number one, why is God letting this happen? Like, why is God letting his ark be taken out into battle? That's a question you could ask, right? And I wrote down a couple thoughts on that. Number one, he's allowing it because sometimes he allows us to grow in such sin that it's like he's waiting for the right timing.
Yeah.
Waiting for the right timing to have judgment. So, for example, it's kind of like if your enemy steals a bomb for you, let's wait for it to take it back to camp before you just explode the bomb, right? Let's be smart about it. And number two, I think he's actually using it as an opportunity. Instead of zapping people as soon as it leaves the tabernacle, I think he's using the opportunity as getting both of the sons out in battlefield to fulfill the prophecy that was given by the man.
Right.
Yeah. So
to cut off the line of Eli.
Exactly. Cut off the line of Eli. So here we go. They take it out, and and the magical box works, doesn't it?
Does it?
Nope. I think it's a major fail.
Yeah. So setting up the battle a little bit.
Oh yeah. Mr. History.
We got the Philistines back, right? So we'd set up the Philistines back in the when we were talking about Samson. Samson was raised by God to begin, and we talked about this, to begin delivering Israel from the Philistines, but he didn't finish the job, and we saw why. Mm-hmm. But it's going to take through David to finish the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines. Right. But we see Samuel and Israel continue to try to battle with the Philistines. Are here in chapter 4. Really, I wonder. I can't prove this via the text, but I wonder if they're attacking Shiloh in response to Samson destroying their temple of Dagon. Their god, Dagon was their god, the Philistines' god. Mm-hmm. And remember, he took their temple gates on his shoulders and kind of moved it out, right? And their temple fell and killed, 3,000 of their people. So I wonder if this is a response from the Philistines. Okay, you took out our temple, we're going to take out yours, right? So they attack Shiloh here, and really this is a destruction of the tabernacle. Yeah. And in some ways, it ends the period of the judges and starts the period of the kingdom, right? Mm-hmm. After this, we'll see Samuel sets up Saul as the first king of Israel, and then David follows, of course. There's a strong parallel here when Babylon, later in Israel's history, after the kings apostate from God and Israel is disloyal to God again through the kingdom period, we'll see that the northern kingdom splits from the southern kingdom, and Assyria will come and take out the northern kingdom, and Babylon, and this is a parallel, Babylon will attack Jerusalem and the temple, at that time and end the kingdom period and start the period of the era of the Gentiles, the time of the Gentiles, where they go into exile. Israel goes into exile. So there's a strong parallel between these two events.
That's awesome. That's really helpful as we move forward in connecting back to Philistines and then connecting it forward. Yeah. So that's awesome. I love that. So instead of doing chapter 5, you have chapter 5 reading, but it really relates really closely to chapter 6, and we don't want to ruin chapter 6 conversation. So we're going to do 5 and 6 together, and we're going to move on to John, so you have extra time. I promised you extra time.
Perfect.
All right.
Love it.
Let's do John chapter 5. We're still doing a chapter 5, just a different one.
Yes. Yeah. Ooh, like that. Let's see what you did there.
See what I did there.
Substitute 1-5 for the other.
Yep. Man, these chapters in John are just dense.
They are. There's so
dense.
much.
And I read them and I'm like...
It's overwhelming.
Yeah. Yes. I have a lot of growth still to go. The Old Testament, I light up when I read it. When I get to John, I feel really inadequate at times. And so if you feel that way when you're reading and it's just a lot, just know that take it in pieces, right? Like, don't feel like you have to understand every part of it every time. This comes with years and years of meditating and understanding and processing and praying. So what I think you're going to do for us today, Craig, is that you're going to take chapter 5, instead of going kind of verse by verse, you're going to do some themes for us.
We're going to do some themes.
So hit your first theme for us.
So first let me set up.
Well, fine. First, Craig, before you give your first theme, will you set us up for your themes?
I will. All right, so thank you for asking. So in chapter 5, we'll see that this is taking place on the Sabbath, right? And John is going to use the next 5 verses to set up 4 feasts that Jesus is going to use to elaborate on who he is. And it's going to break down by chapter 5. Jesus will tie himself to the Sabbath in specific ways. In chapter 6, he'll tie himself to the Passover, and we'll get into that there. In chapters 7 through the first half of 10, he'll get into the Feast of Tabernacles and really tie himself to the temple and what that means for who he is. And then in the last half of chapter 10, he'll tie himself to Hanukkah. What Jesus does in chapter 5 to tie himself to the Sabbath is also our third of 7 signs.
Whoop.
Now,
moving on.
There we go.
Moving on. I want to do it every time.
So we'll post this, but we're building the tower of Jesus's identity. I'll call it that. And this is the third sign, the healing of the invalid at the pool of Bethesda. And this is at the gate of Jerusalem. He's back at Jerusalem.
Yep.
Again, I've said before, don't get caught up on him going back and forth between Galilee and Judea, between the hill country.
This is
and
not a
Jerusalem,
map of
right?
his journey.
Right. This isn't the newspaper report of his life. That's more of what the Synoptic Gospels, I think, are trying to do. But John is more interested in building theological themes and building the story for a theological confrontation between the high priest and the rulers of Jerusalem, and on one side and Jesus on the other. So, and he's going to build up Jesus' identity along the way. So what he's saying here with the healing of the paralyzed man in verses 1 through 15 is the paralyzed man is healed after a 38-year illness, right? Yeah. And so this is saying that the word covers time, and that Jesus is able to redeem time, even the Sabbath. And he says in verse 17, when the Jewish leaders say, hey, it's not legal for you to be rolling up your mat and for you guys to be healing on the Sabbath. That's against Sabbath law. And Jesus says, my Father is working until now. Basically, he's working on the Sabbath, so I am working as well. So there's a couple things to say about that. One, Jesus doesn't actually break Sabbath law according to Torah. The Israelite leaders coming out of the exile, they built kind of these other laws that ended up being codified in the Mishnah around the Torah, the 613 laws in the Bible, because they wanted to build a hedge of protection around the law so that the people of God didn't come close to breaking the law again. Yeah. They're like, we'll give you this hedge, so if you honor these, you certainly won't break the law. Right. So it's that interpretative hedge that Jesus is kind of playing with here. And so he's breaking their traditions maybe, but not the law. So that's one. And two, God set up the Sabbath in Genesis 1 for man, and for us to understand that time is sacred and that we are sacred people in time because of who God has created us to be. And so Jesus is redeeming that. He's saying God is still working in the sense that God rested from creation, but God is still sustaining creation. So I'm going to be sustaining creation too here by bringing healing and wholeness to those who are broken.
That's really beautiful. I've never heard the story being told that way.
Yeah, thanks.
I love that. I have a question though.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have an answer or not, but I thought it was interesting that Jesus asked him if he wanted to be healed. That's the first time I think that's ever happened, where like the person usually comes to Jesus and is like,
that's a great point.
Yeah,
I missed that part.
I don't know if that's significant anyway, but I just wondered why he's like, he's like he has something to be accomplished here, and he's like, so do you want to be healed?
Yeah.
And the man's like, I of course I do want to be healed. I've been trying to get to this pool for years.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, there's a better way. Yeah. You don't have to go to the pool. Yeah.
It's almost like the pattern of the woman the Samaritan woman at the well.
Yeah.
We covered, what was that, last week?
Yeah.
And he's asking her for a drink of water, and she says, why are you here talking to a Samaritan outcast? And then he says, well, if you knew who I was, you wouldn't be asking me that. You'd be asking for
here he's like
living water.
Yeah, right? So if you knew who you were, you wouldn't try to get into this pool.
Right.
You'd be coming to me.
Yep.
That's interesting.
I think that's kind of the same pattern we see going on
here. For not any pre-notice, that was a pretty good answer.
Yeah, thank you.
I like it. So Craig, what's your theme number 2, sir?
All right. So as we get into...
I don't have a song for that, but...
There should be. Maybe I was one. So we get into this pivotal 2 verses in verses 17 and 18. Jesus has done this healing on the Sabbath. The leaders of Jerusalem, the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they didn't really say which ones, but basically Israelite leaders have seen this, and they start questioning Jesus, why are you healing on the Sabbath? He says, my Father is working on the Sabbath, so am I. He's equated himself to God. The chief priests and scribes pick up on this and say, he's making himself equal with God.
Yeah.
And so the rest of chapter 5, 19 through 47, is Jesus defending himself in a sense.
Gotcha.
If he's on trial, here's his defense, right? And he's not literally on trial yet, but this is really kind of a law court vindication, right, for the defense presenting its case. And so as we get into the section of 19 through 47, you're really going to see 2 kind of sections broken up. Broken up into 2 sections. 19 through 30 is shocking. I think both of these sections are chiasms. I could only really prove in the way I was able to do the structure and make it make sense that 19 through 30 is a chiasm, but the repetition is so obvious to me, and the kind of the center part is really cool. I'm going to post it here, but 19 through 30 is a chiasm around the authority of the Son. Where does the authority of Son come from, and what does it rest on? And the center of the chiasm is in verses 24 and 25. Let me just read that. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who has sent me has eternal life. He does not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life. Truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming and is here now, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. And so that's going to point us back to Daniel, the book of Daniel, specifically chapters 12, verse 2, which is, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And then there's also some allusions to Daniel chapter 7 in here that talks about the Son of Man coming before the Ancient of Days and riding the clouds, which is very much language used for a divine entity at the time. So the Son of Man being tied to a divine entity. And so Jesus is tying himself to the passages in Daniel there. Right. And there's also allusions to Psalm 2, which is talking about the royal Son of God.
Gotcha. And
setting up the royal sonship. So all of those Old Testament allusions are at play here and being pulled forward, and Jesus claiming himself as Son of God and as doing God's work on earth.
And so he's claiming all these different things that different Old Testament prophets and such and words and things that they would have known.
Yep.
So when he said these things, they would instantly been like, not only is he claiming to be equal to God, but he's also claiming the royalty of the Son. He's claiming this and he's claiming that. Wow.
Yeah. And so that's the first half of the section of verses 19 through 47 of John 5.
Do they have a response yet, or does he keep going before they respond?
I think they probably have an implicit response, but John isn't really as interested in conversation as the synoptic gospels were.
Yeah.
John is more interested in revealing who Jesus is through some of Jesus's, I don't call them monologues. It's not, it's more of a concept of a play, a monologue, but it kind of is Jesus talking for a long time, just to kind of lay out and build themes that John wants to present. So Jesus continues. We can imagine that there probably was a conversation, but Jesus continues, and kind of continuing the law court theme, he presents witnesses to his case. If this is my authority, here's witnesses to
because in the law they required to have witnesses.
Yeah, exactly. So here's witnesses to validate my claims. And so I think 30 through 47 there's probably a chiasm here. It's more complicated. I wasn't able to tease it out, so I could be wrong. But I was playing with, there's several witnesses here. I think I found 4, and there may be others. But there was John the Baptist at first. There's the Father in verse 37. Really starting in 36. For the works that the Father has given me to accomplish, the very works that I'm doing, bear witness about me that the Father has sent me. And the Father who has sent me has himself borne witness about me. And so, then he talks about his work, Jesus' works will show as a witness. And then at the end, it's interesting because he sets up Moses as a witness too. And so I found that really interesting at the end. Why would he set up Moses as a witness? He's really kind of understanding himself as defending himself in a trial setting at first, but then I think he's flipping the script in the last, we'll say maybe verses 41 and following at the end of the chapter. He's putting the Israelite leadership on trial, and Moses was their patriarch. That was the founder of their religion, if you will. And they looked to him for their authority. And Jesus is kind of claiming Moses as, hey, if you're following Moses, you have to follow me because Moses is testifying to me. And so, by the way, you're trying to put me on trial, but it's you guys who are really on trial. I think that's what's going on here.
Wow.
And so many, we've seen this constantly through the Gospels. Jesus is so brilliant. He's going to constantly flip the script on the chief priests and scribes.
Yeah, he does. We talk about all the time how he flips. It's an upside down kingdom he's talking about, and he definitely does this upside down way of speaking to the authorities and the rulers and the people who are going against him. He has a way of just like, you are doing this, but I'm going to do this instead.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
He even takes their court of appeal, which is Moses, and flips it on its head.
Fascinating. I do have a question.
Yeah.
I noticed that in John we get this word Jew a lot, and I think that might be easily misunderstood because what John meant by the Jew versus maybe when we've heard it elsewhere in the New Testament.
Totally agree. Yeah, and it's a great call out because it's not when they talk about the Jews or Jew, it's not the Jews as a people.
Right, which what we always think about.
Would have maybe you hear in some current modern day or 20th century anti-Semitic context. It's not that. What the underlying word is really alluding to is Judean and specifically Judean leaders. Yeah. And remember, we're in the land of Judea, which was a southern kingdom back in the time before the exile, before Babylon came in the 500s BC. It would have been the kingdom of Judah. And so this is the area of Judea, so the Judeans. Gotcha. And modern, even going back to the King James Version, and modern translators generally translate that as Jew. I think Judeans would be a better translation.
That's really helpful, I think, because it not only is it helpful because I get confused by when it says Jew, right? Because you're thinking, oh, the Jews, this is not what's really happening. But secondly,
it's not all the people. It's
just these people that are here in Judea. Right. And I think the reason that's also significant is because when I read it now, I'm reading, not only is he doing these things to the Judeans, but he's doing all this on their turf.
Yes.
Like.
Just like Jesus went to Dagon's temple to be him, and we'll get into that in chapter 5.
Yeah.
I'm giving a few spoilers, but God goes into Dagon's temple in 1 Samuel 5 and beats him on his turf.
On his turf. Exactly my thought.
Yeah,
I think that's really helpful to understand what's actually happening with the Jews. When you see that, that's what's happening.
Well, that takes us to the end of 5. So
that's awesome.
I think Jesus continues to build who he is through the journey. We've now shown how he's shown how he's now Lord of waters and the chaos, right? Through the first sign. He covers distance with his lordship in the second sign. And now he's claiming lordship over time and Sabbath.
And Sabbath.
Yeah, which is totally fascinating. I still continue to think that God set up the Sabbath to help us remember to mark out time, to help us mark time.
Yes, yeah,
right?
Of course,
We get
it's
a lot
pause so we can.
The Eastern religious mindset, and I'm thinking of more of the religious, the old religious mindsets of, say, the Oriental world, like India and China and Japan, right? They have this notion of a cycle, of a cyclic, life and cycles of creation. Reincarnation is big, but Judaism especially breaks through that and gives us a linear understanding of life and time, and we're breaking through that cycle with forward progress.
So Craig, do you have one thing, like a quote or a phrase or a lens as we finish up chapter 5 this week as we close our podcast?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I would just call us back to the theme that we've been hitting all throughout this episode, and that would be the faithful response that God calls us to. Right? That's what we see Jesus embodying. He has this authority. He has these witnesses. He has this power because of his faithful response, his faithful obedience to God's call. Yeah. We saw Samuel starting to embody that. He answered God's call, and it said from Dan to Beersheba, everybody knew about Samuel, and the word of the Lord started to become more present. And we see the word of the Lord becoming more and more present throughout the Gospel of John as we build. So I just, to your point earlier, these are types and examples and models for us all to embody as people of God, as followers of God. If we love, salvation is faithful love of and loyalty to Yahweh, and living the life of Jesus by identifying so closely with him, as Paul says in Romans 6, we put on Jesus. We're clothed in him, and we talked about clothing being our new identity. So I would just leave us with that we continue to build toward that.
That's great. Thank you for ending that way. We really hope that you guys are blessed by the readings this week, and we cannot wait to continue this journey through the well together. We'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.